I did one of those sound lookups to pronounce somebody's last name, and it couldn't be further than what I thought it was. You know, the pronunciation.com.
Does that work for you? I've had some iffy results in it.
I can only say that I tried.
Yeah,
I
that's
tried
true.
using it.
Due diligence.
Just a note to anybody that has a name that may or may not be mispronounced, it's always best to use the guide when you put your question in. Help us out so we don't eviscerate your name. Have a good show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. Great to have you here. If you've come here via YouTube and want to know more about what we do, head on over to officehours.global, our primary web portal, for more information and links about the show. First hour is always a general discussion of production and IT-related topics where we answer audience-submitted questions. Our second hour today, we're going to be welcoming back Geoffrey Orthwein and Andy Sullivan. Now, they were here in February and again, I think, in March of 2022, talking about their indie movie, I Don't Want to Drink Your Blood Anymore. It's a great title. It's been 16 months since we've seen them, so they're going to come back and bring us up to date on the progress that they've had. So if you've ever dreamed about making your own film or imagine what it's like, they're going to be here to tell you the reality of what that process entails. So you want to stay around for our second hour today for that. But this is the first hour where we address your questions. So let's dive in. Mitch, what's up for today?
Thanks, Bill. Our first question comes to us from Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. He says, morning, everyone. What are the panel's thoughts on the Canon M Lite?
Canon has a long and storied history. I'm not familiar with the M Lite particularly. Mitch, you had some thoughts on it.
It's way too soon for any of us to have hands-on experience. I just was able to go to a couple of links which we should share. It's really interesting. First of all, it doesn't say Canon anywhere on the website, just so you know. The other thing is the idea of being able to build a camera up from just basic stuff, and then they're selling all kinds of add-on things for it. That is interesting because that's kind of what we do now with our cameras. We like building them out with cages and handles and all kinds of extra stuff. So I like the concept. I can only say that the concept is very interesting in what they're offering there.
So it's a more modular camera kind of building system. What does it look like? It wasn't, yeah.
The box.
That's just a box, and then you attach whatever you want to it. Yeah, you're right. You know, people have been putting cages and rigs and things like that around their camera for such a long time that the industry is probably going more into that bespoke build your rig. Alex, your thoughts?
I don't get it. Like I'll just flat out, I don't get it. I mean, Magic Lantern's been around for a long time, and they've made their business around taking your SLR and upgrading it. But I don't understand there's so many cameras that are in that have become kind of more and more that form factor that, you know, we used SLRs because there was nothing else out there. I mean, I had three Canon, Canon Mark IIs or whatever, and 5D Mark IIs, and I would never go back to them. Like, I mean, you know, like it's such a wonky, I mean, it's really, I feel like, I looked at it and I was like, that's a lot of work for something that you could probably get some other way, and I think that I'd rather just put a cage on it, like just put a cage on the thing. You can outrig most of these cameras. So you put a cage on, you put an external monitor on, you add all the bits and pieces on the outside. Changing its form factor to me just seems like a lot of work, and I don't see how there's a lot of return. I think
but
people
it's
just
fun,
want to
Alex.
look and
it's fun
feel
doing
like
all that.
Sure. I mean, it's just like, okay.
Well, I
guess the argument
II
is so that you can go to a client and it doesn't look like a SLR, but outside of that, I don't see why I would encase the camera that way. Whereas I could have just, yeah, the cameras a lot of cameras aren't that expensive anymore. You have to remember in the history, the 5D Mark II was $2,000 or $2,500. The next camera that could do what it could do was like 20 grand when it came out. This was, and so it was a very different world. Now you can get incredible cameras for $2,000 or $2,500 or in many of these things. And sure, they're not a box, but you could easily just put a bunch of gear around it. It's not adding features to the camera. I don't. Okay, that's all I got to say.
It was, back
this.
in that era, I remember, because I was one of the early 5D Mark II adopters, and as Alex was saying, it was a still camera. All those Canon cameras before it were designed for shooting stills. When they put the original Digic 1 processor in there, I think some engineers at Canon figured they could hack it and actually get 30 frames.
And it just barely did
that.
I mean, remember that it stopped after 30 minutes because of some tax in the European Union. It did 30 frames, not 29.97. I mean, there were all kinds of, it was a really, and again, I shot hundreds of hours on those cameras, 3 of them. We shot interviews with them all the time. But it's not a part of my history that I would want to return to.
It was just a different look, and it held blacks, and it gave you a digital video thing at a price point that was unheard of at the time. But I think Alex is right. We moved on, but now that puts Canon and some of these traditional photo companies, and there are quite a few of them, in this odd place where they still need to make their companies work.
Well, Canon has its own video cameras. I mean, it's they've got the 300s and the 500s, and Canon's doing video cameras. I don't think that we need to. I just don't think we need now that the price point of video cameras, real video cameras, is already at a price that most of us can. That if you're going to build this, if you're going to buy that SLR, I think that you could get another camera at this point. And again, I wouldn't put it into a box. I guess what I would say is, there are so many things that can go wrong with what I saw in that video. How it prints, how it gets put together, how the buttons work. I think you're gonna have a lot of performance issues when all you really need is a hard, kind of cheese plate-ish outer rig that you can rig all the gear onto. I think that would work just as well, unless you're just trying to hide the fact that you have an SLR.
Well, we'll see what happens with it. Mitchell, do you want to have a last comment before we move on?
Yeah, real quick. I think they should rebrand it to the Heathkit.
Hallicrafter's camera.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go on to the next question.
Next up, David Brady, New York, asking, trying to grant a remote coworker access to some HTTPS services on the corporate LAN via ngrok. When he tries, it times out. However, it works for me over the public Wi-Fi, cellular, and remote. I'm stumped.
Alex, can you help him out?
This really sounds like what it sounds like is if you've got ports closed somewhere in the internal network. So there's ports that aren't allowed to move that traffic over. So I think that's where I would look. In the streaming world, I don't know what you're trying to pass over. We would look at 8080 or port 80 and not 8080, but port 80 and port 1935. Make sure that those are open in the corporate network, or they may not be. but anyway, I think there are ports closed in your corporate network, which would be very common, either in or out or both. And that's probably what's blocking it. And it would be why the public was working and the internal one was not.
There you go. Hopefully that'll help you, David. Let's move to the next question.
And it's from Goran Khrushchev in Slovenia. Planning to step up my Zoom game for hybrid events. I have a Mac Mini with 2 Ultra Studio 3G monitors to get 2 feeds from Zoom ISO. Should I input my video and audio on the same PC, or should I use another PC and have the Mac Mini just for outputs?
Alex.
I don't think there's any reason for you to need another computer. You can definitely join a Zoom. You can join the Zoom via Zoom ISO. So you can join a Zoom call there. You can have your input go in there, and then you have the outputs go out of Zoom ISO, and that should all work just fine on a Mac Mini. You're not doing so many that it's going to be difficult to deal with. In fact, I think it might actually be a little more complicated if you came in from another computer. You could, but I don't think that I don't see any reason for you to need to use a separate computer. You can definitely just join Zoom with Zoom ISO and then output those two outputs.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida, asking, what is the purpose and use of the double colon on Mid-Journey?
John Preto is here today, and John, help us.
According to the documentation, I don't use it, but I'm going to try it out and see. It's a delimiter between two statements when you set up your prompt. In addition to the comma, the double colon is a hard break or hard separation between the two terms in your prompt.
So it's a little bit like Boolean logic. It's the different form of if or then or something like that. Alex, you do a lot of this.
Yeah, I believe that I've only used it a couple times, and what it does is it says I want this and I want this. When you send it over with commas or a long string, it says I'm going to create something with all the words you just gave me, whereas the colon is a hard break and says I want this and I want this. Now, it may still combine them, but it's saying I really want, this is not a description of one thing. I have two different descriptions of things that I want there. And I believe that you can put in ratios. So you can say I want mostly this or less of that. So, but it's more of a hard break, really defining that these are two separate items that I expect to see in my solution.
So I want 80 violin and 20 purple.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. There you go. Let's move. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What are the current recommendations for a pan-tilt zoom camera, NDI, SDI, HDMI, for live stream and video production? Budget, mid-range, and high-end.
Okay, so there's a lot of action and a lot of equipment in that area. Alex, help us out.
I mean, I think that I would probably look at Bird Dog for the budget version of these, and I mean, it's not super budget, but it would be. I would say that your budget is Bird Dog has probably got, when you're looking for NDI, SDI, HDMI, they have cameras that I think have all of those things. At mid-range, I would say that you're probably, I would call mid-range the Sony FR7. So that's an FR7. That's Super 35, or I'm sorry, full frame sensor. It's the same sensor as the FX6, except it's a PTZ, and we've used those for quite a few shows now, and we're really happy with them. In fact, we're using them this week at Comic-Con. So anyway, so the FR7s are really a great camera in that mid range. That's about $10,000 with the lens and everything else. You're probably talking $12,000 or $13,000 a unit, and so those are so the FR7s are another option in that mid range. At the high end, when you say, okay, now I want to go to a bigger, really bigger version of this, you're talking about Telemetrics heads with individual cameras. So remember that you don't have to have them all in one as a PTZ. You can have a PTZ head and then put a full camera on. I have done many shows with Blackmagic, Ursa Minis, with Cabrillo lenses sitting on top of these Telemetrics heads, and that's going to give you the highest quality. Of course, you can put Venices on them, you can put whatever you want, but when you talk about high end, it can get pretty complex.
Mitchell.
I talked to my friend who works in a rental house in Philadelphia. Hi, Tom. And it's always interesting to see what cameras are going off the shelves for rentals. And in that range, that FR7 is a hot product.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, the FR7, there are reasons. I think that in the $10,000 range, which is kind of a very common range in production for these cameras, the advantage of the Panasonic 150 is the telemetry. So it can send stuff back to be used in Unreal Engine. There's a bunch of things it can be remote. There's some more remote control options for it right now. In the less expensive version, the Canon has a couple of these 1-inch sensors and that are in the $5,000 range. But the FR7, the full frame sensor with that lens just looks so good. It just really it's an amazing looking camera to have as a PTZ. So I'm not surprised that it's really renting well. And I know a lot of people that have bought them.
Mitchell, you want to come back?
Yeah, just depending what lens you put on there. If it's a Sony lens, there's a lot of metadata that lens will talk to the camera body and have there. It doesn't necessarily transfer into all the editing systems out there, but it does a great job.
Yeah, it goes back and forth to the lens, but we're not getting the information in real time. The big advantage of the Panasonic is you're getting that information in real time that can be delivered back to a real time system. So the Sony doesn't do that yet. But we think, I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't be sending us that data back, but it's not there yet.
Wonder if is there a format for telemetrics data?
Yeah, there's a variety of formats that are there. It's just a matter of Sony. I mean, the camera just came out. Sony keeps on doing great firmware updates. We expect to see a lot more by the end of the year.
If you look at it in Catalyst, it's going to show quite a bit of metadata.
Let's move. Next question.
Next one coming up, Simon Ray in Midlands, UK. Can the panel suggest any power-hungry applications or test programs I can use to find the M1 Mac Mini's power consumption under full load?
Well, so I think you've got CPU and GPU, and if you want to really max a camera out, you need something that's going to hit both of those as hard as possible. Alex, your thoughts?
Metashape. So Agisoft has a program called Metashape. Take that. If you can grab a bunch of raw images. So these are, and I'll see if I can, if you ping me on Discord, I keep on meaning to post it. I just don't have a place to do it. So, but if you, because the files are so big, but if you take a bunch of raw files, and go out and take some photogrammetry, maybe if you've got an iPhone 14, take a bunch of raw photos, feed those into it and set all the quality dials all the way up to the top of the quality dials. I have a project with about 192 photos, and I have not successfully rendered it at that res on any computer. It basically runs for a couple days and then restarts the computer. That's all the way up to the Mac Pros. And if you there's a picture, if you see, I think there's some social networks where social influencers that have all of their CPUs and GPUs at 100%. I've helped a couple of folks get it there. But it's designed to fully utilize your CPU and GPU. So if you give it enough data so that it doesn't get through it quickly, and you turn all those quality dials up, you'll push through that computer as hard as it can go.
And I would imagine that if you really want to, you can probably turn your home heater down and do that in the winter, and it will help your house. Your house stay warm. Let's go. Next question.
From Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado, Jack asked, YouTube content often features audio that does not match the video, even from sources that claim to be audio experts. How do we prepare, avoid, and rid ourselves of this video or audio latency?
Boy, it's a challenge, and we've on the show been talking about this for a long time. Alex, your thoughts about latency?
Yeah, I mean, getting the sync right is, the problem is most of the time we're capturing the audio and the video separately. Video tends to lag a little bit because it takes more processing time. So it's pretty common for audio to be a little bit ahead of the video. We spend on a large project, that we're streaming it. And I'm assuming you're talking about streaming, but I mean, that people can also get it off in their audio. If they're capturing, two system audio, they may not get it lined back up again. One of the things that we do, that's why you use a slate at the beginning where you clack down on it. It's so that you have that marker that's there. Oftentimes, one of the things that we also do is we make sure that we're recording audio on the camera, because the audio on the camera will tend to be in perfect sync. And so then you can, if you're capturing it in two system, so if you're capturing your audio on a recorder and you have that, you can always check it against the original audio that was in the camera. So that's one of the ways to just make sure that you're on the right path, going down that system. It's something that is hard because you start doing a bunch of work with your audio, and you maybe take it out to another app, or you start moving things around, or most importantly, you disconnect the audio from the video because you're going to do a bunch of other things to it. And now you just have to really pay a lot of attention to making sure that it stays on.
Those things. The other common thing I see is, you're talking about YouTube content, is people who have shot at non-standard audio sample rates. We see a lot of times kind of the digital world expects 48 kilohertz, but we see people doing 44.1 or worse, 32 kilobit video or audio married with their video, and those sample rate mismatches cause drift over time. So it will start out in sync but get worse and worse as you progress watching the video. So the first thing I do always is throw anything that comes to me from somebody else that I have to use in one of my programs into a little program called Media Info, and it'll tell you exactly the sample rate and things like that. And if I see anything other than 48 kilohertz, I'll do a transcode to make sure that my audio is locked to that standard so that I don't get that kind of drift, which is really annoying. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, is it worth getting the Resolve Studio if you have an Apple Silicon Mac to gain the advantage of hardware acceleration?
Mitch, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm going to compare it to the Mac Pro, which is the Mac Daddy, get it, Mac Daddy, of the Apple product that has the new Apple Silicon. And I would think, first of all, you used to buy the Afterburner card for like $2,000. There's the equivalent of 8 Afterburner cards on the silicon chip. So as long as they're taking advantage of that, GPU or CPU or whatever, they're getting quite a boost in performance.
Yeah, those machines are remarkably fast because of some of those new changes they made. Alex?
Yeah, I think that the Studio is one of the many apps that are going to take advantage of the M1. I don't think you have to get it, but Resolve Studio, I don't think Resolve Studio is particularly faster than the base Resolve, if that's what you're trying to compare. Both the acceleration should work in a very similar way to my knowledge.
Do you remember, do you off the top of your head know any of the capabilities that he would lose out on if he goes with just the regular Resolve as opposed to Studio?
There's a lot of pro solutions inside of the Studio. I don't have them off the top of my head because I haven't. I will admit that you get Studio with every Blackmagic camera when you buy them. All the cinema cameras, and as a result, we have a whole bunch of those cameras, and so we have a whole bunch of licenses of Studio. So they're on a bunch of computers here. So I haven't used the base version for a while, so I'm not sure exactly what the delta is.
Yeah, and there must be some, but I don't know either. Mitch, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, Alex, the other day we were talking about the amount of the optimization in Resolve that's written for Mac Silicon, and I think I heard the numbers of 25%. They're not 100% or maximum.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly what the ratio is, but I mean, Resolve has been optimized towards the M1, but I don't think it's all the code has been written to those libraries. I don't know even if they could do that right now. So, there's just a lot of libraries that may not complete what they need. So it wouldn't be surprising that they wouldn't necessarily do that. But there's still probably a lot of room for a lot of these companies. A lot of companies that are building software for the M1, we look at their speeds right now and make decisions. It's what the Linus Tech Tips thing did, is we'll make a bunch of decisions about what is faster, not taking into account that very few companies have really truly optimized for the M1 architecture. One of the few is if you look at like Zoom ISO and Zoom itself, but Zoom ISO is very optimized for the M1, and what you see are incredible performance. 8 1080p outputs at 50% utilization. So it really has a lot of power that companies haven't taken advantage of yet.
It is time for our reminder every day that your questions drive this entire show. So as always, you're welcome to put questions in. Even Alex used to remind us all the time that even if you have questions outside of the actual show hours, you can kind of pop them into the system. They can stay there for 24 hours, and that's fine. They'll be available for the next one. And when those questions pop up, everybody has the opportunity to vote on them. And voting on the questions, the highest voted questions, get dealt with the quickest, and we spend the most time on them. So it's important to kind of learn that system if you want to make sure that your questions get to the top of the heap, and we spend as much time as possible on them. Let's move on. Next question.
Thank you, Bill. Next one up from Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. Mike asks, "Morning, everyone. I'm looking for some low-profile Bluetooth headphones similar to my Mi Audio X6s for Zoom calls. Any suggestions?"
Alex has one for you. Alex?
Yeah, I think that the question really is there's a lot of questions, but one of the questions that you have is, do you need to speak into them? Are you hoping to use them as the microphone as well as the headset, or are you just trying to use them as the headset? So, Bose, Jabra, Ultimate Ears all have ones that are in ear that are simply They're relatively low profile. They're not going to be quite as low profile as the ones that we use here, because these are wired and they don't have to have the transmitters and all the other things on them. If you're using them, I will say that I wouldn't consider most of the Bluetooth headsets to be a good microphone. Because without a boom going down, so I use the I don't know if I have it here, but I use the Shocks open comms, which has a boom that swings down, and that boom greatly improves the quality of the audio, so that you can and it's bone induction. It's not as low profile because it looks like you got a big thing stuck up here, but that boom makes a big difference. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. I would not use, if I was trying to up my Zoom game, I would not use a Bluetooth earpiece, a low profile Bluetooth earpiece for that. But if you're just trying to listen to it, I really like I will say I like the Ultimate Ears Fits. They're probably not quite as small as they could be, but they're pretty slick. I mean, and then because you didn't give us a price, the ones that you could use that are wireless and completely low profile, not Bluetooth, but a low profile transmission, are Phonak. Phonak is built. If you ever watched 24 and Jack Bauer puts a little thing into his ear, that's what Phonak makes, and so it'll transmit. If you put one in your office, you'd be able to have it be completely transparent. Now, it's not going to have the same quality as a larger one like this, but keep in mind that Phonak it's Phonak. They make a lot of hearing aids, but they make a lot of also security-based comm systems.
Next question.
I've got a question. What kind of gimbal or hand grips are people using to shoot with their DSLR cameras these days?
Let's start with you, Mitch. What are you using, and have you?
I'm shooting it to myself, but here's the thing. I pulled my FX30 off the stand the other day to go out and shoot with it. And previously, I had the classic over-the-shoulder camera or something on a tripod.
Right.
It's interesting how heavy, once you've loaded up, I got Tilta on everything on this camera, that you can't really hold it up here. You really kind of want to hold it if you're going to hold the camera with a handle down here. And then I got to thinking, well, I hear Ronin, the RS2 and the RS3, the gimbal setup, so you can hold it that way, and it's much more comfortable. And then I guess there's a couple of other devices that are, Tilta actually makes a shoulder mount. It goes over and it's handheld, and then you just plop the camera in the middle spot there, and off she goes. So just thinking of ways to best manipulate the camera when you pull it off the pole, because it's been sitting there for 2 years, and now it's time to take it off and do a couple of jobs with it.
Okay. Well, Alex, I know his brother particularly is an expert in this, but Alex also has a lot of experience in it.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do as far as stabilization goes. I have an RS2, which I like a lot. The RS3 and the RS3 Pro are really amazing pieces, and they have a lot of things you can add to them, so that you can do follow focus, you can do a variety of other controls to them. They've really built them into a great system. So I think that the RS2s and 3, and specifically the RS3, is pretty impressive. I don't have it yet, but I have seen it in a couple productions. One thing to think about is there's a reason that we put shoulder rigs on, is because that takes a lot of pressure off. So if you get either an eyepiece, or you get a good monitor that sits in the right place, you can actually sit there and put it over your shoulder. So you get a shoulder mount there, and then you'll have rails, and you really start to build out a full size camera with that shoulder rig. So I think that those are, that's another way to make that work, take a little pressure off. The easy rig style that you were talking about earlier, that goes up over your head, comes down and hangs, it just looks funny. It's hard for people to take you seriously when you do it that way, but it works really well. And if you add that to a gimbal, you can get some pretty great shots. But you do have people, you get a lot of attention. That's the only, it's not low profile anymore. And so those are things to think about. Of course, once you start going up higher, as I was saying, we're going to try to get my brother on. He's got a little time right now because of the strike. But he's using a Steadicam with a Trinity rig, Airy Trinity head, and so that you can, if you're not limited by price, that's
price and the time to learn how to use
buy
it.
a house, for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's a pretty slick little rig.
Those aren't just buy a rig, slap it on. I did that once. I got a full Steadicam vest and rig because we had to shoot something, and I had to be very mobile. And it took me 3 days of going out for at least an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon to start becoming comfortable with not botching the shots, because a suspended camera like that is a whole different center of gravity, and you learn how to move differently. I have infinite respect for the people who do that professionally, because it is not an easy thing. They are skilled. I think they're almost at the equivalent of like ballet dancers. They're really good steady cam operators, because they just physically know exactly how to move to keep the results as close to perfect as possible. So it's an interesting thing. Mitch, did you want to weigh back in on this?
Yeah, and you got to retire by the time you're 50, because your knees need to be rebuilt by that time if you were a steady cam operator.
It is an athletic pursuit, no question about that.
The other thing is, wasn't there a little mini steady cam that Garrett Brown invented that you just stick the camera on the top and it was a little gimbal thing you move with your thumb? But
well,
now,
for phone size things, there's lots of them. DJI makes a lot of those little things that are great, little steady shot, but not for the bigger cameras. As you're getting up into heavier cameras, you have to be more serious about it. Let's go to the next question.
All right, next up is John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Athletics ask for specs on a vMix Windows PC. Yipes! How can users know all the ins and outs? Processors, boards, graphic cards, coolers. Macs are so much easier. Mini Studio iMac done. Thoughts?
John Freddo, what are your thoughts?
If I'm going to build a vMix machine, it's going to be an i7, at least 10th generation i7 or above. Ryzen on the AMD side, if you like the AMD processors, 16 gigs of RAM, at least 4 terabyte SSD, and then RTX, the NVIDIA RTX 3000 or above, a 3000 or a 4000 GPU card, and that's important for vMix.
Yeah, we came out of that era where literally everything had to be specified. The bus speed of your hard drives made a difference as to whether or not your video editing dropped frames or not. I see less and less of that just because computers are getting more and more powerful, but I know it's still a thing, and it's always good to pay attention, do your research, and make sure that you're not buying something that is at the right price for you, but that just can't do the job that you're looking for. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if someone was going to ask me to do it, I'd start building the budget around a $4,000 or $5,000 box. I mean, some people will spend a little less on it, but I would build now if you really, Puget Systems is probably the thing that I would really think about of just having them build one for you. Because you could say, I'm doing vMix and I have this budget and they'll build one for you. It might be a little bit more expensive because they're building it out for you, but a lot of people use their systems. If you want to build it yourself, of course, exactly what John said. You need a faster graphics card. Make sure that you think about how many outputs you want, because that'll define, whether you get a duo or a quad card for your, because you have video in, video out. So remember that you have a bunch of I/O that you need to create there. So you might have a couple Decalink cards that you're putting in there for getting the video in and out. You may be deciding you're using NDI, but I would still have SDI as an option. So those would be some of the things that I would consider. I'd probably lean towards the Threadripper for this type of thing. But I think that for $4,000 or $5,000, you could probably get a pretty solid machine that will do a lot of the work for you.
Let's go to the next question.
From Daniel McFarland in Northern Ireland, Belfast, Northern Ireland, Great Britain. What IFB internal foldback? I think that's what you refer to it. Would the panel recommend
interruptible
foldback, whatever. It's so funny. I've used that acronym so long. Sorry. Which one would the panel recommend for live production and Zoom calls?
Let's see. Alex, start off.
Yeah, there's the standard ones, and then there's a couple of the other ones that are out there. So you have the standard is Audio Implements is the one that makes, for most broadcasters, that's what they're using. If you see the little loopy thing going down the side, they're using typically an Audio Implements that's there, and it works pretty well. There's also Ear Hero and Bubblebee. Those are going to be very low profile, so you'll see very, very thin lines that go up there. And so Ear Heroes are used heavily in security by all the way up to Secret Service. And so they're very, very, very low profile. Bubblebees are probably a little more comfortable with a little bit better audio, a little bit better isolation. So those are all the standard IFB inputs. Now, I have to admit, for Zoom calls and for what I'm doing here, I am using these little Linsol SZ10s, I think, are the ones that I use. They're about $50. If you spend the ones that are more, you'll look at it and go, oh, $50. What happens if I spend $130? I find the $130 ones very uncomfortable. So I'd rather just have, and I have extra boxes of these ones, because that way they will fall apart if you use them every single day, 4 or 5 hours a day. You're eventually going to reach the end of their cycle. But But the overall, I find that the audio quality is really high, and it's pretty isolated. I put them in both ears instead of one, so that I just want to be present to the show. Now I often do one ear. If I'm doing production where I want to be able to hear things around me, so you have to also decide what you need there.
And I use these guys from N-Ear. It's the same kind of thing. These are equivalent to the Bumblebee and things like that. They're down around $100 for a mono earpiece. They use a 3.5 millimeter connector. It takes stereo and folds it down into mono. They are invisible. I've got one in right now. And I'm not saying necessarily you have to buy them from these people or whomever. I'm just saying that these kind of things, if you're not looking for music quality, you want to be particularly comms clear. These are designed for those kind of security applications where people need to make sure that their comms is correct. I've been surprised, though, at the quality of the sound out of it. I actually sometimes do mic checks on the days that I host, and I've learned how to hear these in a way that I can tell whether the bass is missing. I mean, they're not full-scale music quality, but I can hear those frequencies and whether they're present or not. And so it's been very effective for me. Your mileage may vary. Next question.
J.J. McKenna, Santa Venetia, California, coming in with a question similar to an phone holder with quarter-inch threads. Are there holders for the Elgato Stream Deck with quarter-inch threads to mount multiple decks at a workstation?
Alex, have you solved this problem?
The place I would look is actually Etsy. There are so many. I've been trying to find the ones that I want to use, but I've been searching for a couple of these because I've got kind of a growing collection of Stream Decks in my office, and I'm trying to figure out where to mount them. Now I kind of hack them and just put plates behind them and make them work where I need them to go. But I think that I've been looking for these mounts, and almost everything that I find that I want to use is in Etsy. So if you look there, you're going to see a lot of fairly, they're not particularly expensive. They're in the $50, $60 range. And they are all, there's lots of different versions. You can have a little one with an XL, and you can have, they have all these different pieces. Of course, the other place to look is Thingiverse and other things like that, where you can see there's a lot of templates out there that you could print and then just simply tap it with a quarter 20. So those are other options that you might want to take a look at. So you can find ones that you can print, or if you're looking for something that looks a little bit more refined, and you don't have to do anything other than drop them in, then I would take a hard look at Etsy. There's a lot of different versions.
Let's go next question.
Peter Rosado from Las Vegas, Nevada, asking panelists thoughts on the IMAX info presented here. And there's a link.
I haven't been able to follow that link, and I know, Alex, you do some work on IMAX. Have you been able to take a look at that and see whether that IMAX conforms to what you know about IMAX?
Yeah, I mean, I think that IMAX 70 millimeter, I think, is what you probably want. Now, most of my knowledge around IMAX is around some other stuff. So I think that the other thing you want to look at is, there's a couple of different things to think about with IMAX, and you're probably going to want to. The hard part right now is that most of the biggest theaters, the biggest IMAX theaters, are sold out for Oppenheimer. I think all the way through its entire, almost a huge part of it to run is they're sold out, and so it's hard to get into them. And not all of the so I think that's the thing that you kind of have to take it into account. I think that I would definitely see Oppenheimer at an IMAX. I think that you're going to be pretty happy with any version of this that you see in the IMAX format. This was shot for IMAX. It's built for IMAX. So I wouldn't go see it at another theater, to be honest. It's now the other thing is that with any theater, there's optimum seats. The optimum seats, I think, in an IMAX theater is usually 7 to 8 rows from the back. You want to be up a little higher than the middle. Than you would normally put yourself in the middle, but you're going to be looking up a lot into an IMAX theater. And you kind of want to get to a point where you're looking straight across to the center of the screen. So the screen tends to be kind of lower down. And so what you want to do is you want to, like when you're looking at the center of the screen, you want to be kind of sitting there right in that area. And then you want to be in the center. Now, I consider the problem for me is that I only consider about 12 seats in any theater worth having. So there's the optimum row, there's the row behind it and the row in front of it, and then there's 2 seats on either side of that that center column that I consider viable. And so if I can't get a seat in that, in those seats, I don't go to the movies. And so the I'm not going to pay a lot of money to sit in the corner. So so I think that, and I feel like the seats that are in the front, the very front seats that you might see wide open, I think there should be a law. I mean, I'm not usually up for laws and new laws and everything else, but there should be a law against this. There should be a minimum
theater-goer regulation.
Like theater-goer regulations, like just take those out. I mean, come on. Like no one should be buying a ticket and end up in there. Although I do see people, I'll see an empty theater and I'll see people like who bought those on purpose. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand like why you would sit down there. Anyway, but I think that I would go for there in any given city, there's 2 or 3 theaters, 2 or 3 IMAX theaters that are the main IMAX theaters, that will be the largest screens. Not all the IMAX theaters are the same size. So you want to think about those, but those are the ones that tend to get sold out. So you start thinking about what time you'd like to go to see the movie. A weekday in the morning is a good idea. to find the theater that you want. Just take a day off. If you really want to see Oppenheimer, just take the day off or move your schedule around and go see it in the morning. But a 10:30 show is a lot easier to find good seats.
I saw a picture that came by on the internet a couple of days ago, and it was the actual 70 millimeter IMAX print of Oppenheimer. And it apparently, Mr. Nolan was so specific that there's like an inch, a 64th of an inch left on the outside of the gigantic roll of film, because he literally filled up the maximum amount of time you can make an IMAX 70 millimeter print for. I guess the movie is 2.5 hours or something like that, and it's right at the edge of having to be a 2-reel IMAX. The reels, these are huge platters of Yes.
film. So these massive. I was somewhere where there was a Pacific Rim, IMAX, film there, and it's I think it's probably 5 feet in diameter. And it's just this giant reel, and the IMAX prints are just massive. It's incredible, when you see them in actual film format.
Let's move. Next question.
Next question from Gregory Wheeler, and he's in Elliott City. What is the difference between DMX to ArtNet and DMX to Ethernet?
John Preto.
Okay, so networking protocols, you've got two different layers we're talking about: physical layer and then data link and networking transport layers on the OSI model. And so DMX, as it was originally defined, uses XLR, either 3-pin or 5-pin connectors, much like you'd see in audio, but they're a different impedance. And then the DMX to Ethernet is an adapter that will take in the 5-pin or the 3-pin and then convert that into Ethernet using one of the protocols that DMX uses over networking, which is ArtNet or ACN. There's like three different protocols you can use within your network. So it's you're transposing 2 different things here in your question, but that's how they work.
Thank you. That's good. By the way, I just found that picture. So that's how much of the Oppenheimer, that's how much, there's just no room for any more footage on the massive reel. That's really cool.
And you know how much it weighs? 600 pounds.
There you
So
go.
if they have a small number of people at the theater, they all got to go up to the projectionist booth and help them move the platter.
Help them change to the next movie. Be interesting. Again, it is great to have your questions in, and we're always looking for more. So every time you see office hours, we're excited to have you put your questions into the queue. And please do vote on those questions. Let us know which ones you're most interested in. Next question.
Here's Tony Mobley from Noonan, Georgia, asking, I need to edit a short trailer video of 2 minutes. I have my iPad Pro to use for House of Worship. I'm away from my home for now.
So, Alex, what is your recommendation?
I assume what you're talking about is you're trying to edit something on your iPad Pro. You're not going to be home. I would really look at LumaFusion or Final Cut. For those, I think that there's a Resolve is on the iPad as well. I think it's probably a little heavier than what you need for what you're doing. So I think I'd probably focus on either the new Final Cut, which just got an update. I think that they just went through and got a host of new features and fixes and so on and so forth. So I'd play with Final Cut or LumaFusion. And LumaFusion, of course, has been on the iPad for a long time. It's probably a bit more mature, but they've really done great work with Final Cut as well. So those are the two that I would play with to see how they work.
Yeah, I think LumaFusion runs on more types of iPads. I think that the Final
got an
Cut
iPad Pro,
for
so
iPad.
I think it's the iPad Pro.
I think it has to be an M series though, so maybe an older iPad Pro might not run.
If you don't have an M series, you'll need to use the LumaFusion, which is a great solution for what you're trying to do. Absolutely.
Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael is here with a question. If I wanted to market my electronic music to game makers and 3D content creators, would the Unity Asset Store or Unreal Engine Marketplace be a better platform to start with?
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably the Unreal Engine Marketplace or the Unreal Marketplace is probably a lot more robust as far as the movement goes there. So that's probably the one you want to look at if you're trying to market those things. It's going to be, I will say there's an enormous amount on both of these marketplaces, but it definitely, the Unreal Engine is very deep. So I would manage my expectations on the kind of sales that you're going to get, just because unless it's very specific and something that people want to jump on, I think you may find that the numbers are really hard to get because of the marketplace is so mature.
Next question.
I have a question here. In Teratron or Teleprompter, how do you use your prompter for daily Zoom meetings?
And Mitch, you raise your hand on. Do you have an additional comment or want to clarify further?
Yeah, I kicked it back to myself. Sorry about that. When I was shopping for a teleprompter, I went all over the place. I was a 24-inch, big 42, some gigantic monster thing that Alex has described before. And I ended up with a small 7-inch home stream for an Teratron because I don't have that many situations where I'm reading text. So if all I want to do is make eye contact, I have a monitor that's plugged into the active speaker on Zoom. And anytime someone speaks, including myself right now, I'm looking at myself, I can see eye to eye with whomever is right there.
Alex.
Yeah, I mostly use it for an Teratron. So that's the primary way that I use the teleprompter. I don't like to read text that much. so I think that it needs, I feel like there are times when we need it. And what's great is if you have a teleprompter on, you can very quickly switch between one to the other. Now I use Smart Prompter Smart Prompter, which will just listen to your voice and just move along with it. Mostly because I just don't have, oftentimes I don't have a teleprompter operator for my own stuff. But again, I tend to prefer to practice and have something that looks maybe not quite as clean, but it feels a little bit more authentic when I do the records.
Next question.
From Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina, what model Peplink does the group suggest that can accept house internet and provide cellular failover to my production kit?
Alex.
Yeah, so one thing you want to think about is whether you need to bond the cellular or whether you're using cellular modems on their own. So if you're trying to do a failover to a 5G or a LTE, and the question really is that, so I think the ones that we've used in the past have been the Max HD series. But one of the things is if you're bonding it, I believe that Peplink has its own service that you can use their cloud. But what we've done in the past is there's one piece of hardware in our facility that is the receiver for that for the bonded connections. And it's providing bandwidth from our facility back to the bond, because something has to give that bond back. So if you're bonding the cellular, it's one type, and you need another piece on the other end. If you're simply using cellular as a rollover, then there are more options. And again, I believe that what we've used in the past, it's been a little while since I've used them, but I believe that what we've used in the past have been primarily the Max HD series. So take a look at those. There's a lot of different sizes available.
Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael asking, recently a team of security researchers used an abandoned Uplink facility to broadcast via the Anik F1R satellite. Wouldn't the encoding Uplink hardware be hard to use for the uninitiated?
Mitchell?
I remember the first time I did a radio show via satellite at the MGM studios in Disney dropping a name. And we were on the satellite as our foldback, and it was very hard getting used to the 2 seconds it takes for your signal to go up to the bird and then come back down. I mean, it only goes at the speed of light, doesn't go faster.
Wow. That must have been an interesting thing. I've told the story before about doing stadium announcing, and the fact that there was about a 3/4 of a second delay between what I said and what came over the speakers just totally disoriented me at first. It's very hard to speak into any system where you're hearing yourself back with any kind of significant delay. So that would be really difficult. Congratulations on getting through that, however you did. Let's go to the next question.
Talaloc Lopez Waterman from Brevard, North Carolina. Is a 10K ohm resistor the right choice for a pull-down resistor for digital input on an Arduino?
I'm not a technical... Alex, do you have thoughts on whether or not that works?
I believe that it's a commonly used one. So I think that's probably, I think the problem is making those decisions tends to be dependent on what you're planning to do with it. So it would be hard inside of that question to answer it exactly. But it's oftentimes a used, that's oftentimes what is used. But I'm not sure if it depends on what you're doing with it.
Mitchell, additional thoughts?
Yeah, I go back to my old days of logic circuits. Using a pull down or a pull up resistor, because you can do both. You can go one down with a little with just going to ground, and if you use one going to some voltage, you're pulling it up. It's in order to force the digital sense that you're messing with, that it doesn't go drifting back and forth, because sometimes it can just go high or go low, depending whether it's playing limbo or not.
Next question.
Next question for David Brady in New York, New York. What type of content benefits from high bitrate streaming settings? I tend to be conservative and stream general talking head events at 2.5 kilobits versus motion heavy at 5 kilobits. Thoughts or opinions?
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to be a little bit more aggressive. So when I'm I like to try to at least have a ladder. So it depends on whether we're sending something to a CDN like YouTube or Facebook or Vimeo or any of these other ones. They're going to do their own transcoding. So they're going to transcode that for you. Now you're just looking at what to give them as a maximum rate because they're going to build the ladder. So there's an HLS ladder that typically is built on the delivery. If you're building your own if I'm building my own ladder, then I tend to now I want to have a great maximum. So I want to have something that's up there. What I would consider is, for 1080p 30, I would look at about 6 megabits a second is usually what I consider. And that is about 3 times the number of pixels at 30 frames a second. So that's that's kind of my and so if I move down to 720, I can move that down to 4 megabits. And as I start to build that ladder, now I might want to have one step above that. So 6 is a solid 1080, and I might give you an 8 meg or 10 meg, so to where you're about 1 meg a second to make that happen. I have to admit, I don't do a lot of really low bandwidth because there's just not that many people with that anymore. But you can go down to like a 240 p solution that's at 400 or 500K per second to do that. So it just depends on what you're trying to produce there. Sports, obviously, or anything high motion is really going to be sensitive to it. So anywhere you're moving the camera a lot, editing the camera, doing lots of playback, having a lot of motion, you're going to want to turn that bandwidth up, or at least have that upper end that's available to you. Talking heads you can get away with a lot. That's what we do here. You can slow that down a lot and take advantage of the lower bandwidth opportunities.
Yeah, for a long time, I've had a video clip that was a tree silhouetted against the sky with the wind blowing everything around, and it was really, really hard to encode. So that was always my test. If I saw blocking and just couldn't keep up with it, I knew I had to increase my sampling rate. And John Preto?
I just want David to note that his math is wrong here. If he's transmitting video at 2.5 kilobits per second, he's got the best compression on the planet.
Kilobits, not bytes. Isn't that reasonably?
No, mega. It should be
I took it as a I just took it as a typo and just went to mega.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, yeah.
Megabits per second. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Thank you. Let's move. Next question.
Jason Robertshaw from Sarasota, Florida, has a question. For Zoom presentations, is white text on a black background or black text on a white background better for slides, not just for aesthetics and readability? Does it make a difference for Zoom performance?
Alex.
I think that in general it does, because it doesn't require as much. You won't see one thing that Zoom doesn't like is gradients. So gradients, lots of soft colors, lots of transitions, and anything that's trying to take advantage, trying to give you an efficient stream is going to tend to break up a little bit in that area. So that's something you want to kind of think about. Now, I'm still trying to figure out whether I move over to white on black. As far as right now, I mostly do black on white. And the reason that I do that mostly is because I'm matting a lot of things. I render a lot of things out of Midjourney for my presentations. I find images on the web that I want to use, and it's much easier. The alpha channels, or not the alpha channels, but the matting, what it sits over top of is typically white. And so it's easier to find images that are over white than over black. And so as a result, when I use the remove background in Keynote, I get a little white edge. And so I have a tendency to use white backgrounds, because that white edge becomes really not something you notice. Whereas if you do it over black, you'll tend to see that white edge. And so it's more of an aesthetic decision on my part. So that's why I do it. I'm not, I think it's probably easier on everybody's eyes for me to do lighter on dark, but it just doesn't look as nice.
Back in the broadcast days, I was pretty specific about this, because the way televisions work, they're additive color as opposed to subtractive. Subtractive is things like print, where the light hits the page and the page absorbs everything except what it's going to reflect back to you. So that's subtractive color. Additive color is like a TV where you have RGB and you have 3 guns firing. To get white, you have to fire all 3 of them at maximum. And so it's going to hit pixels and generate white light. Consequently, I always thought that black, where everything was not firing, was much easier to achieve than white, where you have to maximize the amount of power to light up all those pixels. Now, we have moved away from mostly CRT screens, and we're in the world of LCD screens and things like that. And I'm not sure the delta between the amount of power it takes to turn a chip one color or another is much at all. I just carry that over from my old days, and I always think that darker backgrounds with lighter text stand out and is easier on the eye for me, provided you have enough resolution, particularly if an overdriven screen of either kind is outdoors. I find it sometimes harder to read dark type on a white background than to reverse it out and read light type on a dark background, but that's just me. That might be an aesthetic choice. Next question.
Here's Douglas Carmichael asking, I'll be meeting with the IT media technology lead at a local private school next week, and I'd like to get to know him, but I also am interested in learning about the local tech and media market where I live. How can I make the most of that meeting?
Alex, some suggestions.
Well, I'd start to ask him if he knows those things. I don't know if I don't know if you find a tech lead at a private school, how much they're going to know about the local tech media market. They just may not have any of that information. So I would pretty much, I would kind of probably go around very carefully around that, because asking him pointed questions about that, I think that what he's going to be interested in talking about is what he's doing. So I would start with most of the discussion, just finding out what they do and how they do it and what their challenges are and what their solutions are. And then probably near the end of the meeting, I'd probably maybe ask them some stuff about the community in general.
Yeah, one more. Let's sneak in the next question.
And it's for me. I'm asking, the Sony FX30 seems to be a great camera for the money, although a bit on the high side for a webcam. What features appeal to you the most?
Alex?
The autofocus. So a picture quality to autofocus, but the autofocus has been the thing that really made it work for me.
Yeah, both Mitch and Alex. And Mitch was just demonstrating that. Mitch, you want to do it visually?
I'm just kind of bragging a little bit here when we talk about autofocus. And of course, I've been talking about autofocus for about 2 years, and it's finally catching on. So I'm kind of like, okay, autofocus, Sony, yeah. But what's interesting is that the camera that Alex is using is the FX30, and it's making a pretty good picture. In fact, it's at least as good as my picture, which is done with an FX3, which is a camera that's about twice, maybe 3 times the cost of the FX30. So it's interesting to see what Sony is doing. They're making more and more cameras that can be used as webcams at a better price point. So maybe you're setting a new high mark there for us, Alex.
Those cameras have been really impressive. I mean, Sony, from the days they started with the A1 original camera, I remember taking that out into a dark scene, and with a long exposure, the amount of light that chip was able to resolve into a decent picture just astonished me. I mean, my jaw dropped. It was so amazing to be able to do that well in low light. Now, that wasn't video shooting. It's gotten better in the video things, and it's still a superb low light camera. But I just thought, boy, this technology has really, really changed. A couple of notes here as we get to where we're going. Friday's show tomorrow, loading in and loading out. This is something that is near and dear to the heart of anybody who's had to do remote production for a long period of time. Knowing how you're going to get in and out of a venue, of a shooting location, of a bluff in the desert, doesn't matter. And particularly, I know a lot of us have had to load in and load out of convention center ballrooms and things like that. And it's a delicate thing. The more of it you do, the more you realize there are hundreds of pitfalls. And getting experience in this, particularly as you move from the stage where you're doing bags into doing cases and things like that, as your gear grows, the complexity of your load-ins grow. So we'll be talking about things like site surveys and carts and cases and all the ins and outs of loading docks. And believe me, it is a huge deal. Getting to know how to work with the loading dock. I remember pulling up in my, I think, Honda Element, thinking, well, I'll just go to the loading dock and load in. But the loading dock was set up for semi-trailers, and it was so high that we ended up having to offload everything and cart it up 2 sets of steps just to get to the top of the loading dock. So it's one of those things that the more production you do, the more you realize how important these things are. All right. We are excited today to welcome our special guests. They've been here with us twice before, and we're really... Excuse me? It's going to be fabulous to see them again. Geoffrey Orthwein and Andrew Sullivan, our dear friends who came in back, I think, in both February and March of last year. And we're talking about their exciting new production, I Don't Want to Drink Your Blood Anymore, one of the great titles of all time, in my opinion. And it's fabulous to have them back. They're going to give us an update on what's been happening. They shot this, I guess it was about 14, 15 months ago, and have been in post-production ever since. And we're going to talk to them about the process they've gone through. So, Geoffrey, Andrew, how are you doing?
Good morning.
Doing well. How about yourself?
Fabulous. Great to have you guys back again.
We chose the title because Oppenheimer was taken. Otherwise,
well, one word versus a lot of words. But more people I've told your title to, and they went, "What a great title for a movie!" It really gives a brand promise right off from the bat. So we're really excited about that. Give us a little update. What's been happening? This must have been a very exciting year for you.
It's been very exciting. There was a big, exciting shoot in Massachusetts. And then, let's see, that was the coldest spring ever, I'll say. Boston, north of Boston, does not get springtime as early as anticipated.
So there was a challenge just in terms of the temperature, let alone you were dealing with COVID and all sorts of other things that were undoubtedly challenges for this.
Yeah, it's and we'll talk about it a lot today, or if the audience wants to talk about it, is just the production itself. I mean, just a 17-day shoot is a very tight shoot on any film, whether you have millions and millions or whether you have hundreds of thousands or whether you have tens of thousands. And so doing that where you're shooting day for night, night for night, switching whether you're starting a shoot at 7 or 8 a.m. or you're starting a day and a half later at 8 p.m. to 9 a.m., right? So it's there's a lot of things that just kind of mess with your head and just kind of you're working against nature. It's not nurture or nature. It's neither of those when you're trying to make a vampire film on an indie budget.
It's when the lead character can't be in sunlight, that means most of your crew can't be either. So being nocturnal for the better part of a month had some physical ramifications and psychological. I mean, everyone will pull an all-nighter every once in a while, but doing it 6 nights a week is a different experience.
So you did that practically. You were in, I assume, a house kind of location. So was it just easier to shoot at night so that you didn't have to deal with any exterior light rather than blocking it off from interior spaces?
It was a combination. Yes, we were primarily, most of the film takes place in one house, and we could, black out windows and do day for night without much trouble. But there was, due to scenes that are, like on doorsteps and that kind of stuff, there was stuff that we had to do, practically after dark. So we had control of a certain amount. Especially the advantage of one location, but it was still a slave to the elements.
Yeah, and it was different techniques, whether it was blocking out a window here, tenting the kitchen windows. I mean, depending on how big this house, we were fortunate enough to have a house that literally was there for the Salem witch trials. I mean, it's a 400-plus-year-old house that has its own, which is incredible because we just wanted a house that felt old, and this house felt old.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing to have a house like that, but you're also just aware that when you have grips and assistants running around with heavy metal things, you're trying not to bang into floors that the owners will know every single crack. And also just like when you have a dolly on it, just like you're hearing those floors because those floors have been heard for 4 centuries.
Organic creaking.
There's going to be a fair amount of audio cleanup on the floor creaking.
Yeah.
When we do our final audio mix. And yeah, every C-stand that gets placed down on a wood floor is just...
Fascinating. Well, so safety is something important. I probably should have started with just letting you guys give a kind of a quick slug line of what the feature is about so that everybody kind of understands the world we're going in. So it's a vampire indie movie, but tell us a little more about what you're trying to accomplish here with the film.
Sure. Most important question of the day, Alex took care of, but it is Oppenheimer 70 millimeter, a real IMAX theater. Best way to see it. You're not going to get a good seat for at least 5 days, so you're aiming for next Wednesday or Thursday probably is your best shot right now.
Also, our run time's like 2:15, so it easily fits on the platter.
Oh, yeah. Not a question at all.
Love it.
So the film is about a vampire who suffers from agoraphobia. So she is a vampire who doesn't want to leave her house, which makes it challenging and doesn't want the world to disturb her, but the world won't leave her alone and also needs to feed. So her challenge is literally she does not want to leave her house to feed, to interact with humans or anyone else. And it's our first film, Boca, which was about a couple who went to Iceland to get away from it all, and then the world disappears. We like lo-fi sci-fi. We like lo-fi horror. We like basically character pieces that take something that is large on a genre scale and try to shrink it down as small as possible.
So let's talk about scale. How many crew, how many cast, what's the kind of scope of the film that you're trying to achieve here?
Right. So the crew was, it varied somewhere in that 30 to 40 range, I would say. Is that with production crew, we average 20 to 25 on the bigger days. Yeah. Plus cast. That does not include cast. And then with cast, it's on any given day, it was anywhere from 1 to 10 cast members, with a lot of it being 2s and 3s at most.
So that's a big lift for craft services and everything else on set to just manage that many people.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up craft services. That's a key point. We had a snack table in the basement of the house, but catering was kind of a challenge because most of the set was, active sets. Most of the house was active sets. Sorry, I've got a photo of one of our crew meals down there.
Cool.
This is the crew on location in the backyard, right against this salt marsh on the coast of Massachusetts. That was one of the better actual days where we could eat, but it was, just, and that yard was a set, other days of the shoot. So it looks like the Last Supper. That's not what we were going for, but it's, but yeah, look, at certain nights where it's cold, you are just in a garage, 3 tables around space heaters, right? There's,
Geoffrey, I think I see you in the deity position there in the middle of one side of the table.
Just having both hands up. Yeah, we didn't.
I don't know.
Jeff produced the film. You're never going to know who's going to betray a producer or who the producer's going to betray. So it's always it's close to Last Supper there. The person furthest away from Jeff is going to be the one fired that day. So I mean,
there's a lot of symbolism in the film. Is that what I'm understanding here?
Yeah.
Yes. The free lunches were method. Yes.
So tell us a little bit. It's been it's been more than that. It's been 14 months since we've seen you. Is there an overarching theme that has emerged in the post-production process that has been either challenging or glorious or whatever? What's the feeling been like over this period of time when you're getting into the nitty-gritty of editing, mastering, doing all the things you're doing now?
We were talking the other day in terms of like overarching themes. What's applying in post is the same as what applied on set, which is the things you thought were going to be hard are hard, and the things that you thought were going to be easy are hard, and the things that are simple never are. So whatever amount of pre-production and prep, do it all, because you're going to find your way into other bigger problems. It's the only way to keep from capsizing is prep. So yeah, just a bunch of sneak attacks.
Right. I mean, definitely the stereotype everyone likes to talk about is that your film's made 3 times, right? It's made at the script level, it's made at production, it's made at post-production. But that almost takes away from the fact that the script and production both are telling you the truth, right? Like you can fix things in post, but the truth is still the truth. If you had 80 pages that was one character where it should have been 15 pages, or you didn't have your character arcs in the script, again, we can do some things to finesse and to lean on against us, either to enhance a script or production or to challenge those things. But there's an honesty in each of those categories. And it always makes it seem like post can just be the great healer. It can do a lot, but your facts are still your facts. Your story, your character arcs, your thesis for what the film actually is, how production went. There's only so much you can do in post. And it's also, of course, we want to fix things in post, but we really just dislike the term fix it in post. I mean, we're much more fix it in pre. If you can fix it in pre-production before you even get to production, that usually is where our heads are at. And so that even if things go wrong, and they go wrong every single day of production, maybe you fixed enough things in pre that less things go wrong on the Wednesday at 2 a.m. when you need something to go right? So, I mean, that doesn't mean that solves all the story. That doesn't mean that when a location falls through last minute, that's not an issue, or you didn't shoot as much as you want to shoot on a day or in the 17 days. But that's kind of where our heads are at in this.
The just quickly to follow up on that, the magical lesson for me through this, and to a certain extent on Boca as well, but it's been very clear and present on this, is I just refer to it as story math, and story math is not elementary math. Story math is not 2 + 3 = 5. It's not about we need a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that, because it's not that binary. It's not that simple. It's mostly you add a little bit of this flavor and it activates that flavor. And so a fix is not always about simply adding or subtracting. It's about how do we remix this in a way that activates this flavor.
Interesting. Andy, as the director of this movie particularly, what were the alterations from the scripting point where you thought you were going to make this movie this way, and then you sounds like you were finding things along the way that changed some of those beats or arcs or story points. Can you talk a little bit about that process of having to adapt to the actual realities from what you originally envisioned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a precious filmmaker, and maybe that can also be seen as a bad thing, right? So I'm willing to walk away at times from scenes or shots or beats or other things. And again, sometimes that can be a big problem because you need certain things to protect the story, to protect production, protect post-production. There were enough times where after we would get the shots, we were aiming for, I would call for basically Andy B-sides now, and it would just be like just certain things I wanted of just quiet moments, especially because a lot of this film is about a vampire by herself. And so if I could create just imaginary scenes that aren't on the script of just someone like just leaning against a wall holding her knees, I don't know where that's going to be in the film, but I now know it's going to be in the film. If I see someone on the bed struggling just to not even know what to do next, there are a lot of these kind of quiet 15-second to minute pieces that aren't in the script at all, but they're in the script because just the story set, like they're not written in the script, but they're feelings in the script. And so it's easy to say you're looking for surprises, and definitely it's always exciting when you're seeing the cast give you something you didn't think about before. But a lot of the surprises are actually a bit more focused than that. Like I'm still looking for things that I know will fit within the world. So I mean, a lot of it are kind of these quieter shots. When I'm filming, I usually start with where the actors want to start. I actually, unless they're just confused about that the script's not coming through to them, or it feels very different character-wise than where they were before. I mean, I'm always meant to be the tone cop on set, so they can feel like they've got the freedom within a parameter. But I always start where they are, and then we kind of tweak from there.
Nice answer. And Geoffrey, as producer role, when that hat is on you, you're trying to protect Andy and give him the space to make these creative choices. What were the kind of problems that you ran into that you said, listen, I got to keep this out of my director's head so that he can be effective and do what he's supposed to do for this film?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that bubble up, you know, some bigger cracks in the production, and then, you know, the constant noise of everyday things that are constantly happening. There was, you know, one big thing that, you know, I tried to keep off his radar, although at a certain point we couldn't. It was just there was a key prop that what ended up being hard to locate. And, you know, I had a chat with our production designer a couple days before the scene. She let us know we're having trouble locating this thing, and it's not an easy prop to find. So, you know, it's not something that's carried in a prop house. I don't want to say specifically what it is because I don't want to spoil the scene. But then it just became a scramble of like, we're just out there on Facebook, we're out there on social media, like calling everyone we know. Hey, do you have this thing? Do you know? And it was
the MacGuffin. But something important that
MacGuffin. Yeah. And so that was a thing where like, okay, you know, I wanted to be on set with Andy, you know, as much as basically for every scene shot, supporting him in whatever he needed. And then this was a situation like, okay, I'm out. I got to come over here and I just got to make phone calls because we have to find the MacGuffin. Spoiler alert, we found it. You know, we saved the day. But it got a little, and that was one where like I'm making phone calls and I think you walked through the room and you're like, yeah, sorry, we're going to get this thing. I promise. You know, so I couldn't keep it completely off his radar. But it was very much that sort of thing of step aside, let him focus on the scene. I'll worry about tomorrow.
But it's bigger in that, in the fact that the first thing Jeff does is talk with Dana, who's our AD, who the reason we have a film is because Dana was our AD.
Yes.
He talks to her and be like, can we switch this day around? I know there were 100 reasons why the day was meant to go shoot this scene, this scene, this scene, this scene. Yep. Can we move it so this is the last scene so we have a fighting chance to be able to do this today? We can do it tomorrow, but that'll cost other things. And Jeff is kind enough not to say this, but it probably is almost job number one. His job is to protect me from me. And it's not a joke. It's literally like, it's just my instincts in a moment, or I'm too practical at times. So I will be aware of production. I'll be aware of clock. Like I shouldn't be aware of the clock. That's Dana's job. She runs. It's disrespectful if I'm thinking about time too much. I shouldn't be aware of certain things about production. I can't help it to a certain level. Like I try not to find out about it all the time, but if I'm just hearing buzzing or things. And so Jeff, a lot of the times, there's a reason we can work well together, and it can be exhausting, but I'll always choose the exhausting part, which is I partly like to work with Jeff is because he will beat me up. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean like we can be brutal to each other and we can be grumpy in the moment and we can be grumpy for 2 hours later, but we'd always rather work with each other knowing we can get through that quickly, right? Like it's not personal. It's not like he knows I'm going to roll my eyes at something, and yet he still knows he should tell me that thing in that moment, right? Like that's not And that's always who you need with you. Jeff and I, something about this production, which I don't know what it'll look like next time, but Jeff and I are the only two people worked with each other. Like Jeff and I worked with each other on the last film. We worked with none of the other people involved on this film before. This was the first time. Some of them had worked with each other, which was great, and they had rhythms, but it was the first time we had worked with anyone else. And so making sure that our language with each other could translate and that theirs could translate to us.
Nice. Well, I really wanted people to hear kind of the relationship part of this and the kind of things that you don't think about from the outside. If you're thinking about making an indie film, you're talking about the real world practicalities of on-set relationships, things that are challenges, things that cause people to blow up or be comfortable in their roles. And that really is the world of indie film production. I think it's all those things.
I mean, I think a couple key things that, and it's true of lots of films, but we definitely set it up this way, which is, no a-holes on set. That's rule number one for us, which is don't be a jerk. If you have an issue with someone, talk to them individually or bring a producer involved into it, but don't not have scenes there. We are open to people's ideas. But it's important for everyone on the crew to understand two things, and that I understood these two things as well. That Dana ran our set, our AD runs the set, not me. She runs the set. I come to the set, I work on the set, I do the best I can, but it's her set. And that Jeff and Raz, our two producers, they were above everything else. And so it's not, I'm open to ideas from lots of people and may the best idea win, not just my idea. And so we want a structure for that. But if it just comes at me 5 different ways and doesn't kind of go through Raz and Jeff or Dana, the whole thing just kind of tumbles. And so making sure that you try, we're people like flat organizations normally, but it's just like you need some hierarchy just to make sure to help everyone to understand how to have the conversations that they want to have.
Well, and
that's why we talk so much about this relationship stuff on the show when we're talking about this. Jeff, real quick, and then I want to get Alex involved in this and some other people.
Yeah. Just quickly to follow up on that. 2 things. Yes, Raz is not here with us today. He's in Rhode Island, but in all the producing stuff Raz and I did together, he's in this, as much as I am. He's just not here on camera today. And then just on that other point, I think we get lost in a lot of working on scripts and working on story and getting the camera and the tech and the everything. And I think the most effective thing that everyone should be practicing every day is just communication, is learning how to clearly communicate directly. And part of that is, I'm going to tell you something. This is not an emotional statement, but I know you're going to have an emotional reaction, but that I'm not attacking you, but you need to know this. And also, knowing what not to say. Like there is a huge power in, shutting the up, because it keeps, again, from my perspective, I had to keep noise out of his head. And so knowing which conversations to have and which conversations to not have is critical.
Wise words. Alex, thoughts?
Hey guys, a couple questions. How did the storyboards work? So we saw all those storyboards that you worked on before. How did they line up with what you ended up shooting?
So right. So we showed you last time we built our storyboards in Storyboarder, and then we
lost your video there.
We lost picture. We can still hear you.
Okay. Stand by on that. Look at our photos.
Yeah, there we go. There's the photo. We see the photos.
All right. So, but I can still talk storyboards here. So we started in the program Storyboarder. It's a free program. Neither of us are artists. And so that allowed us to have 3D models, bring it all in. We'd export it into 1 of 2 places, either Final Cut Pro when we were trying to make a movie version, which ended up being like a 30-minute version of the film in just storyboards. And then we also import it into Shot Lister to make the literal story, like our shot list per day. Yeah. The challenge, I would say our challenge is our Storyboarder is a concept piece that does have shot lists in it, but it has way too many shots. So, every day you do this anyways, but you definitely did it with our shot list, which is you were just paring down the shot list in order to just try to have the shots that you believe. Again, filmmaking is brutal, where it's like you have all these ideas for all these shots and you have a lot more shots than you're going to get done in a day. So you were just trying to figure out how many shots can you really get done in this 12-hour period. You're trying not to go overtime too many nights in a row, because every time you go overtime, it affects budgets for every single department, for the cast, for everything. And so we have some of that planned in, but you're always trying to figure out what shots do we need. I'm a more intimate filmmaker, so I tend not to live as much in wides. You need some wides to be able to explain geography and location things, but I like closeness wherever I can. I'm a fan of the oneer, but oneers can really lock you in, especially when you're doing character pieces and things. So I mean, we had our plan every day, and every day we had to adapt and decide what shots were we dropping, what shots were we changing because of where light was, what shots were we adding because we dropped 2 other things and we needed something to make up the story.
I'll say in regard to storyboarder, it came out in 3 specific ways. When Andy said about putting things into shot lister so we could literally build a priority list, then exporting just the TIFFs so we could build a pre-edit in Final Cut. We had a did you say this 42-minute cut of the film using storyboards. And then while I don't like to read and I try and stay away from practical physical media as much as possible, I did print our storyboards. And this is literally every board of the film, so that I could literally just without having to wrangle technology. This is something I needed physical media, just like, you know what, cross that off, we did it. Any kind of notes, some of the timing and stuff like that. So what I will say is if you're going to print your storyboards, choose a lighter weight paper. I just went with the default choice, which is like a 24-pound thing. This thing is ridiculous. Now we had too many storyboards, but like, oh man, just make sure you're printing on the cheap paper. Holy cow!
So I mean,
2 words for you: onion skin.
That again gets back to the relationship point, because I would have to cut this down. I would send it out every single day to DP, to our producers, to AD, to the department heads. Jeff would then kind of look at it versus the largest version of the storyboards, just to be like, I get why we're cutting this down. I know we need to. I still think we need this shot for an editing stand. Like Jeff would be trying to bring in an editing voice in the shot list, and Una, our DP, is also an editor. So it's actually that's where some of their common language was of like, oh yeah, we need to transition from this last scene, and we need this shot to kind of put the puzzle pieces together here. Something else I would say, because and I know there's lots of questions and thoughts around Midjourney, appropriate nature, and all that. I actually, in the past 6 months, just started just trying to understand it. I hadn't used it before. And so I retrofitted some of the shots in this film in Midjourney of just like a young Japanese-American woman sitting at a dining room table, 1978, staring at a hot pot by herself, just to see what this would look like. And so, I mean, I think the amount of arsenal you have as an indie filmmaker now to be able to make shots and be able to have a level of creativity and specificity that I can bring to our production designer, I can bring to our art director, I can bring to costumes and things. I mean, we've always had slides, we've always had photos. I showed those last time, but it's amazing the level of conception, just what you can conceive before basically shooting anything these days is incredible.
And this is the call sheet in the storyboards there.
Yeah. So just every day for the 17 days of shooting, every day I see that the camera's going again. So Jeff's just working on that.
Yep.
But every day, basically, all the crew is given this, and it's the specifics. Again, if you haven't been on a set, the specifics are where you parking that day. We can't have literally 11 different cars and buses and things at this one person's house. So just where's the 5-minute parking from there? Who's picking everyone up? Who's driving? As the director, and I know it sounds silly, and it was silly to me, but I just went with it because our AD said so. I never drove to set. I never drove from set. The AD did every single day because they just didn't want me thinking about driving. They wanted me to think about what I'm going to film that day, right? And so it's not to be precious for a director. You're trying to protect the best version of the film, and so decisions are being made every single day. What protects the best version of the film?
Yeah. What cameras did you use?
We used the Alexa Mini was our A camera. We used a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera as a B camera, and then sort of as a C camera, which it's probably going to end up in the film a couple of times, is Sony 6400, little mirrorless guy, but mostly the A cam.
And we're as the edit's coming together, there'll be a couple shots we'll pick up, and we'll rent an anamorphic lens and camera and just do a couple basic outdoor type shots of seasonal things and such to be able to add within there. And we had a very pretty, beautiful, creamy lens package that was insane for this film.
What lenses did you use?
They were Cook anamorphic primes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and they were birdie.
Yep.
Yeah. And what mics and recorders did you end up using for this?
The bunch of Sennheiser booms and lavaliers going through a Sound Devices recorder. Yeah.
That's great. How did you handle archiving? Is it something that was a big, like when you start shooting and getting on?
There was some data coming in. So our friends at OWC sent us some RAIDs, which were pretty great. I've got one right here, actually. This is one of the smaller ones, the OWC Gemini. So this is a 32 terabyte RAID. It's just a standard 2-bay drive. This is sort of our second backup. Our primary drive, which is too big to hoist onto the desk, is the Thunder Bay. It's got 8 drives. Super fast, Thunderbolt 4 ingest via MacBook Pro. So yeah, we would just be constantly sending cards down to back up, to ingest and then have 2 backups. So we had 3 copies. And I brought this back to my hotel room every night, just to have one offsite. So that's always fun. And then
Andy, you said you cut it all. You were cutting every night to try to kind of piece it together.
Oh no. That was more storyboards.
Got it. Okay.
And just shot listing and everything else. So no, we again, on a film this size, it's really hard to kind of have someone trying to put assembly down at the same time. I mean, that's the dream, right? To be able to see, but where Jeff and I just had to have that honest conversation with ourselves is like, if they found a hole, what could we do about it, right? When you're shooting 17 days, when you have it,
right.
Yeah, you can fix a little bit, but in fixing that, you were giving up other things, right? So as much as it would be great to see some assembly and see what's working, I mean, if a shot looked beautiful, we'd bring some cast and crew down to the basement, let them see some of the successes coming out of the film just to kind of boost morale, because you're always trying to boost morale. But yeah, we didn't edit at the same time.
How much did you find you're changing the script on site?
I mean, there definitely are. It's not a lot, but there were a few scenes where we were just like, we don't think we need one, we had to ask ourselves, do we need this scene? Why do we need this scene thing? So, I mean, there were scenes that were cut. There weren't scenes that were added. There were character moments that were added, as I mentioned before. But you're talking if the script that was 83 pages, it gets down to 78, or if it's 78, it gets down to 75, right? It's not, you're really not tweaking it too much. You're definitely working with your actors. If a line of dialogue feels too hearing dialogue again when they're in the takes, if less can do it, great. If something can feel more authentic, or what sounded good on paper doesn't sound great in their voice, or
I think it was more economizing of shots.
Yeah.
We had 5 boards built for a scene, and it's nope, there's a oneer.
Right.
And that was mostly scheduled. It was mostly what, we got to bang this out. So we're doing it in one.
Yeah, and even the scenes we gave up, it was schedule based. I mean, it was again, we didn't give up anything that felt like it had to be there, but it was all schedule based.
Right.
Very nice. And Mitch, did Mitch have questions?
No.
I thought he had. No. So it looks like we get to go to our actual questions, unless you guys have another topic that was really outside of the box that surprised you, that you think everybody would be really excited to know about.
I mean, one thing I'll just add to when you asked about what surprised you in post, it doesn't surprise, but it's a level of gratitude, because when you were looking at things, you were looking at what Layla, our production designer, which was one of our MVPs, everything she did, how you take that house to make it look like a 1978 house, her and her department. When you're watching it, you were grateful because you remember at 4 a.m. you weren't sure you were going to get the shot, and Dana, our AD, and Una, our DP, fought to get the shot, right? You were grateful that sound, that a 1970s refrigerator makes gigantic sounds, and you were grateful that Josh got the sound from it, right? So I mean, you're reminded, we all make mistakes, we all had issues. This thing maybe wasn't focused the way you wanted, or a take wasn't done the way, or I made a mistake, but you're just reminded how often that you got to work with people who are great at their jobs and gave everything they could for a month on this film.
Nice. Plus, I'm now seeing the value of fluorescent vests in a way that I never did before.
Oh yeah. So I mean, this is I'll talk about this day because it was a brutal day, like most of them are. So we're shooting outside the house, 2 of our characters. We had multiple scenes that night outside the house. We had to bring cops on board because they're shutting down the road for 4 hours. They're paid by every 4-hour shift. And so ADs and producers, and again, they're we just didn't have the money to make that an 8-hour shift, right? So, I mean, you're racing the clock. You're creating lighting outside for, it's cold that night for Sierra and Mickey to shoot the entire time. They're champs about it, but it's cold. We're all wearing vests so that we can just, again, always on crew, and we haven't talked about this yet. It is safety first. It's everything else a far behind second. If you don't, it's irresponsible to think about it any other way, right? It is safety first always. And so if someone wants to roll their eye and go, I don't want to put a vest on, it doesn't matter. It's just like safety, no matter what. And that's how it's designed. So that night was just 4 hours with the cop because we were just walking to the road almost for like 30 seconds of the scene. But you have to just make sure you can stop the cars for that or slow them down for that. And then we also still would have another 3 hours outside for the other scenes we were trying to get done from midnight to 3 a.m. where their characters are yelling at each other. Basically, you're hearing echoes. I mean, it's your neighbors like watching from, they weren't in the shot. It was nice that they were nice about it, but it's like they're watching from midnight to 3 a.m. As we're shooting some of this stuff. Other thing I'd say about safety, again, we were in that weird point of like COVID opening where we could make this film, and we'd wear masks inside, and we would, except for the actors when they were obviously shooting, and we would try to be spaced out enough outside where we could have it where people didn't have to wear masks the whole time. But one of the most, just again, I'm fortunate in my life that COVID didn't affect the people closest to me, so I know it affected people much more than it affected me. On this set, we had to have everyone tested. And that's just a scary day when you just see that box and everyone's tested and you wait 24 hours to find out how many department heads are you losing, how many crew members, how many cast. And we didn't lose anyone, but it's a nail biter. It's a tense day.
I bet it was. We have a ton of questions that have piled up, so let's get to them. Mitch, what do we got?
All right, starting off with Mickey Makachor in Manila, Philippines, asking 17 days. How many pages per day was that? And the page count consistent, or were there slower or longer days?
Yeah, it is. Some days you're barely getting a page. That might be 4 scenes even, because there's a lot. And some days, if maybe you get up to 5. We had to do 5.5 pages a couple days because some days you barely had a page, so you're really having to it roughly
4 to 6 days, right, on average.
Yeah, I mean,
4 to 6 pages per day on average.
Right. The average page count's probably 4.25 is what you need to hit. But you were having days where you're barely hitting a page, especially if it's like driving outside and you're putting camera rigs on cars and you're trying to put cameras outside for cars to drive by. Those are really slow days again. And since a decent portion of this film is about a vampire by herself, that's not dialogue, and dialogue's much quicker to shoot. That's just paragraphs of description of what Aiko will be going through. And it takes a lot longer to shoot that in terms of it. So, I mean, you're trying to average 4.25, but we had a lot of 1 page or 1.5 page days.
Really quickly, before we get to the next question, how long do you think the runtime is going to end up being?
We're at 92 minutes right now.
Yeah, and that's good credits and things. But I think we'll end up around there, yeah. 89 to 94 minutes, somewhere in that. And that's, again, when you're doing a story that's somewhat about an individual vampire, you shouldn't run long for long's sake. Like, you need it to be able to tell its story. But, and though, again, this is more the practical side, because story is king and you should make a film for what it is. You also have to be aware that people are thinking on iTunes at 8:30 at night, what movie length am I willing to watch a movie in a single thing, right? And that's changed. That used to be 2 hours, and you'd go to the theaters and things. Maybe you'd watch it at home on a Friday night. Now that's 85 minutes. It's 90 minutes. It's 95 minutes. And so that's, again, not our guiding direction for the film we're making, but you shouldn't ignore that either.
Perfect. Next question.
From Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. Do you work with the Mass Film Office, and do local film offices make a difference in planning or production?
Yes and yes.
Okay, simple enough.
But Massachusetts has a fantastic tax incentive for filmmakers. That was a draw. We worked with them a lot. We are still working with them as we, continue that process to retrieve our incentive. So yeah, local film offices are important.
And
there you go.
It's near impossible to make it without them. I mean, it really, I don't know what that looks like. Like, not only are you getting tax incentives, but just they know
cooperation
what you
and not standing in your way. Yeah. Next question.
From Chris Clark in Tempe, Arizona. How long have Andy and Jeff known each other? Do you credit your long pre-movie making relationship with the quality of your partnership now and going forward?
I think it's about 33-ish years.
About there, yeah.
Yeah, and we both always loved film. I don't know if we always knew we'd be filmmakers, but we always loved film. We love talking film. We love seeing film. And then there was, on our last film, Boca, just one day, we'd always talk about making a film. And when you know you're going to make a film, that's the challenge, is because you don't have to make it because it's always in front of you and things. And one day I just sent him like this paragraph about a story in Iceland, and I was lame enough to send a keynote presentation with like 20 slides of different pictures where scenes could happen. And a year later, we finished production in Iceland. So it doesn't normally go that quick. It probably shouldn't go that quick. But again, if I'm going to be in the trench with someone, Jeff's who I want to be with, because he will be right. He knows how to bring out my strengths, and he knows how to challenge my weaknesses. And I always need someone to challenge my weaknesses. Humility is only ever been a good lesson for me. So if I can have someone who can help me with that, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you don't
go ahead,
always,
Jeff.
You don't always want to work with friends. That's a double-edged sword. But Andy and I, in addition to being friends for a long, long time, have found the right ways of working with each other.
There you go. Next question.
From Courtney Gooden in Hollywood, California. Were you able to tie in for power, or did you have a generator? And was there any problems with neighbors and sounds coming from the set with larger crew when shooting nights?
Yeah, first thing I thought when you said an old house was power. What did you run into?
Yeah, so this actually is a shot of our set, and some of the period props and set design that we did. Because it was an old house, and it did present some challenges. Power was not really one of them. We were able to get all of our power from the house. Some of the location stuff, there was a generator, but it was not a huge impact on our production. And then noise. I mean, fortunately, we were in a semi-rural area of Massachusetts, so we were more concerned about the noise we were making than noise from around. Although cars driving by is always a challenge, and we've got a house near a street, which made some noise. So even when all the doors are closed and everything else, there are audio challenges, not so much power, but the ever present audio challenges.
So what you're seeing in these pictures here, because it's always interesting to me how set comes together. So it's a false wall we created in the kitchen. Again, this is a 400-plus-year-old house. You have to be very delicate with things. They found our Layla found this 1970s wallpaper that we used.
I have some right here.
Oh yeah, nice.
Because we're very much a fan of this wallpaper.
Yeah,
it's lovely.
And just every single person who came in here gave them nightmares of the kitchen they grew up in.
Yeah, I mean it spoke to us.
And it's wallpaper that you're putting on the wall, but it's not glued to the wall, so it's basically attached to something else that you can easily pull off.
Right.
The other photo is basically the garage was turned into a prop shop where basically they would be like, which of these 5 phones do you want? Which of these 4 lights do you want? Like it's just me getting to shop basically for my dreams of what the small film looked like, and it was awesome.
Nice. Next question.
From Kyle Hammond, and he's from Chicago, Illinois. You mentioned starting by working with the actors. How much rehearsal were you able to do, and do you roll on rehearsal? It's very hard for an indie film to rehearse before you're actually in production, because you're normally bringing actors from different places. They're coming off of productions or a break or something else. And so we rehearse, basically, we block and rehearse at the beginning of
every basically location or new location within the house that we'd be shooting in a day. We keep it as few people as possible. It starts out usually the actors and myself, but I bring Una, our DP, in pretty quickly, so that you don't want the DP to be so far away from the conversation. And the actors were great about having Una there. At times, Jeff would be there representing production there just in case there were any other issues, and Dana would be there from the assistant director position. But a lot of times you're trying to have that as small as possible, so it'd be myself and the actors to begin with. Then we just add a little bit more, and then we'd bring the crew in for where Dana would take everyone through blocking.
Next question.
And it's coming from Douglas Carmichael. What camera and recording pipeline did you use, and what editing software did you use?
Yeah, so that was the Alexa Mini, like I said. Our pipeline, I'll talk more about in a second. I'll just jump ahead to post to say that we're cutting in Final Cut Pro, which has been going pretty well. The pipeline, part of our pipeline discussion was dialing in the exact resolution and aspect ratio. We knew from the jump we wanted this to be an anamorphic widescreen aspect ratio, which the Alexa is great at, but there is a whole matrix of options for format and resolution and data rates, and whether we're shooting RA RAW, which has its own challenges in Final Cut Pro versus capturing a ProRes 4x4, which is obviously much simpler. I also was looking at. I wanted to shoot ProRes RAW, which I was part of the analysis, but the RAE doesn't output RAW for a recorder, so that it was RA RAW or nothing. So this is the kind of spreadsheet I put together for our camera spec, based on what the output resolution would be once we de-squeezed. Our anamorphic squeeze ratio was 2x, so we've got some pretty serious resolutions here. And then you multiply that by an RA RAW data rate, and you're looking at filling up 30 terabytes of a RAID. Thanks again, OWC.
Next question.
From Craig McFarlane in Boston, Mass. How do you balance shooting sequences for ease of logistics versus maintaining cast mood and story sequence?
You balance on logistics. Like you take the others in mind, and you hope you have a strong enough crew like Dana, our AD, and Jeff and Raz producers, and the department heads and things to make the others work. There will be times where Una, our DP, would be like, can we shoot that later on Monday, because I think that'll be better for the actors. So it's like lots of people are trying to think of keep our actors in mind, and a lot of people are trying to think of, again, morale and the crew. You are thinking about those things, but you build it off of logistics first. It's logistics first story.
Yeah, I mean, at the independent level, there's a lot of romantic talk about, we shot this because the mood of the actors was right here, and it's all pretty glorious, but it's not accessible to the independent filmmaker. I mean, that's the reality of it. When you do not have money to buy time is the deciding factor for basically every decision. Now, the challenge, of course, is how do you mesh the clock with your creative intentions? And that is the filmmaker's challenge.
Right. And so, I mean, you try to film 3 living room scenes with Mickey as Aiko back to back to back, and they take place on 8 different nights, basically, in the script at very different points, different costumes, different makeup, different looks for the living room, because the film takes place over 50 years from like 78 till now, essentially. And then you'll realize that you've got another actress coming in a week from now that's also doing a living room scene. So even when you try to plan to keep your logistics together, to keep your sets together, you'll then, based on which actors come in and then have to use those sets again, do it all over again a week from now when the next actor comes in to work in the living room with Mickey.
Interesting. Next question.
From Mickey Makachor in Manila, Philippines, asking, are you going through the festival circuit, and are you presenting at a project or film market? When and where is the world premiere?
the when and where will be the good question. We'll be as curious about as you are, maybe even more so. So come this fall, as we have a locked in edit and as we're going through post, we will get on a call with our producers and some other people who we trust to talk about the festival, our festival strategy of what festivals to submit to, both in terms of some of the ones that are known and also some of the ones that are more genre specific. So, I mean, none are obviously the South bys, the Sundances, the Tribecas, the Torontos, and the ones that are more specific are Sturgis or Fantasia or Austin, which are more horror genre. And even though this isn't horror straight, they also do horror adjacent or character pieces within a genre. So, I mean, we're going to look at all that. We'll look at a strategy of trying to bring on a sales agent to be able to help sell the film. The distribution pipeline changes every single day. So, I mean, it's very different than when we made Boca, and that came out in 2017. In good and bad ways, it's very different now. So, I mean, it is, again, important to really have a strategy, not just wish fulfillment. 10,000 plus films are submitted to Sundance and 70 plus get in or something. So, I mean, you better have a strategy for when you get the no's, not when you get you need a strategy for the yeses. Very few people get yeses. Lots of people get no's, and you better have your strategy based on the no's.
Wise words. Next question.
Kyle Hammond is in from Chicago, Illinois. Kyle says, did you say that Storyboarder and Shot Lister communicated, or did you have to manually export from one and import into the other?
So that was a haze for me, those nights of doing that. I've been in my head trying to ask myself that question while talking through this, because I think I did a little bit. I'm pretty sure I was able to make it work between the two. I would want to go in and look again, but I definitely I finagled with it once it was in Shot Lister. But there are ways you're able to export out a Storyboarder into Shot Lister, and so there was a lot of kind of manual stuff in between, but there were easy ways to get stuff into there.
Next question.
I've got a question for you guys. How did you use in-camera effects to reduce your dependence on post?
I don't know if we did a lot of in-camera effects other than like practical makeup effects and planning some certain transitions. Not a lot of like whip pans or anything like that, because that's not the style of the film. But it was mostly making sure that the vampire teeth, felt good and real and practical, not like digital inserts. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of other camera trickery.
And I'm sure all of you talk about this a lot at times, which is CGI, if it's good, or VFX, isn't just VFX practical or virtual, right? They're the combination of the two. Yeah. So like we'd have the practical tooth, but you're going to use a digital to kind of build the tooth up from like a normal tooth up to it in the first shot to be able to show the vampire's tooth, and then you're using practical. There's other props where, again, we had some gross things that are practical, but we know there will be some goo or sheen or something on it from a visual effects aspect of it, right? So, I mean, the things, again, he does it at 1,000 times different level, but Christopher Nolan, what I always do admire in Mission Impossible 2, which is they both do a lot of practical, but the level of visual effects that they do around that practical are incredible, right? The jumping out of an airplane's practical. The sunrise may not be, right? Like it's they're going to go for maximum. And so, I mean, on a small film, what's true is you don't want to go into a small film and then guess what you have to do in visual effects afterwards. You want to know, like, right, this mirror, she can't see herself in a reflection. It's going to be green screen. Do we have a shot of the back of the room so we can put it in the mirror, right? Like yes, you can fix some of those things in post, but every time you have to do something more, it's going to cost us more.
Alex, you had a follow-up?
Just two questions. One is, what were the teeth made out of? And two is, what are you using for visual effects?
I'm trying to, there's a guy in Massachusetts who has a magic store
in Salem, Massachusetts. We got our vampire fangs from Salem, Massachusetts.
So we had a vampire tooth guy who came in and like like a dentist, they'd be in a chair and he'd like make their molds for them.
Molded the actors' teeth,
and then would make like a smaller and a larger, and we choose which one. So I mean, he was incredible. I love that we have a vampire teeth guy,
and he matched the teeth color. They're
awesome.
They're beautiful things.
Right. It's a cool. What was the second question?
What do you do in the visual effects?
We haven't completed or really kind of gotten into our major VFX shots right now, beyond basic compositing. In the edit, I've composited stuff right in Final Cut. There's a couple things I've done in motion. Just as temp stuff, although there's one or two of them that temp might, get struck off the VFX checklist. But yeah, right now we haven't gotten into it.
And some of it, again, I don't pretend anything is basic. To Jeff's point, hard is hard, easy is hard. Some of the things that you're going to do in this film, and some of it ideally is easier, is removing her reflection from cabinets and things. Most 1970s stuff have a lot of windows in their dining room cabinets or reflections on a teapot or something. And it's a vampire, it doesn't have a reflection, right? So, I mean, there'll be a lot of the little things that we're trying to do, and then a couple slightly bigger things within it.
Nice. Mitch, you had a quick one?
Yeah, would you follow previous things like in True Blood where they tilt their head back and then the teeth pop down? Would you follow anybody else's lead on that?
Is there a vampire language?
Yeah, I mean, we did have vampire language. Nothing's original now, right? There's both original and not original. You're playing at the edges. So, I mean, the very first thing was Mickey, who plays Aiko, who's our vampire in this film. We went with her performance of ways that she'd been thinking about it. You know who's been thinking about the vampire performance more than I have? Mickey has for months. And so we kind of started with her, which was great. I mean, she showed me a couple things ahead of time when we would do our video calls and things, but it's like on set, we just like, you trust the people you're working with to see it. We had talked about it, and we had talked about that we weren't trying to follow anything else. And she kind of has her mannerisms and her neck ticks and her moving around her mouth. In terms of it, basically. So she created a lot of the language, and then we tried to build basically around that.
There's an extensive history of vampire films. So there is a common language. We didn't need to explain certain things, but there were certain vampire lore elements that we did want to reinforce that are relevant to our film.
Right.
It was, and it wasn't relying on any specific previous film or series like True Blood. It was more what is consistent across all vampire lore. And one of them is the concept of the good vampire. So much of vampire lore is the good vampire. And our key character of Aiko is somewhere in that, behavioral spectrum, I'll say.
Interesting way to think about it. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael. Douglas wants to know, what made you choose Final Cut over Resolve?
I've been a Final Cut editor for a long, long time. I was with it in the transition 10 or 12 years ago now. There's a lot of talk, a lot of discussion on this. But for me, it's very simple. It comes down to the magnetic storyline. There is no elimination of the technological barrier in storytelling, in editing, more than Final Cut Pro's magnetic timeline. Resolve is fantastic. Resolve is very powerful. Resolve is an entire toolbox, which is fabulous for toolbox engineers. But when it comes down to telling a story, I don't want to worry about a lot of that stuff. I want to know that I can put a picture and an audio piece together, the base components of cinema, as quickly as possible. And that's what Final Cut Pro does for me.
Next question.
From Courtney Gooden in Hollywood, California. Courtney says, since your main character was an agoraphobic vampire, did you have to make sure that all the light bulbs and practicals and movie lights were not daylight balanced to avoid toasting your main actress?
Nice. I'm glad we're sticking the nerd landing on this show.
I'd expect no less a question from Hollywood, California right now. So well played.
Well played, Courtney. Next question.
Michael Smith in Silverado, California. Is the writer's strike going to work to your advantage to help sell your film?
We'll see.
I mean, we have friends who are writers. We have friends who are actors. So it's a fair and a good question. And there will be a part of us that will at least understand that some people are going to be looking for content, right? And definitely indies, because indies are allowed to do things differently. We're not in those unions at this moment, and so
and I'll just say we're not in the unions. I fully support what the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild are doing. I think they absolutely have a valid perspective, and I wish them the most success. Not being a part of either one of those unions, time will tell if the vacuum of content creates an opportunity for stuff created outside of it.
But I tend to think probably not. I mean, I think it's just that maybe a slight door will open or something, but chances are it'll be the same uphill battle it would have been with or without that.
Sure.
Other than thousands and thousands of people are fighting the good cause, and we hope they get what they want.
Yeah.
Let's get to the last one real quick here.
From Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. I've heard it said that you should have a project in your pocket while promoting your current project. So what's next?
I'm working on an idea right now. You want to try to find the right idea to work on. So I had an idea I was working on for a while, but that just seemed like just too hard in indie to try to pull off again. And not that I want easy indie, but I want something that that I think could be made. So I mean, there's an idea I'm toying with. You don't want to. The hard part is, and again, it's been a while since we filmed, so that's okay. But it's like you don't want to get addicted to the new when you have to deliver the best version of the thing you're making, right? And so some people are great at that. So I mean, I write down kind of a paragraph ideas here and there. I write down some lines of dialogue. I write down some scene ideas. I take some photos, grab some photos, use Midjourney a little bit to kind of put it together. Definitely, I want to keep doing a little bit more of that, but yeah, I
think that's wise advice to have something in your pocket. I think we're gonna finish this project, and then once we're locked on it and are moving more into the distribution side, that's when we'll be really kind of polishing our presentations on the next material. We both have feature scripts. Yeah. We both have a series that's been largely developed, is ready for, kind of the major pitch. So we do have like a small portfolio of indie features, little bigger indie features, limited series type stuff. And I think like I said, we'll polish the edges on that once we lock this.
Geoffrey, Andrew, thank you so much for coming back and giving us an update. We look for the next time that we can see when hopefully you've got a finished film and we can talk about what it took to get it there. Thank you to everybody who is involved in Office Hours every day. Our guests, our panelists, our producers, the crew on the back end, everybody putting their time in to make this happen every day. Well, that wraps us for today. Don't forget, After Hours goes 24/7. See you tomorrow. Well done, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Apologies for the outages.
Cats are delicious.
You crash pretty reasonably. At least we had something.
That's why you go prepared, right?
Amen.
So yeah, hopefully that covered the topics you wanted to cover.
It did. It's great to have you guys back. I'm so excited to see how this continues along.
Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Yeah, it's always fun with you guys.
Yeah, that was really good. We're still sort of semi-live.